Hello everybody, welcome to the stream, second stream for today actually, since we've seen each other last. Why is this camera crooked? Why is it doing that? Since we've seen each other last, I've done some work, I've done some exercise, I've showered, I've prepared the podcast, and now I'm ready. Took me a bit longer, but there was more drama. Today's a bit, there's a friend of mine has had some drama today, and it's just been constant all day. And I'm just trying to provide some emotional support. But now I am ready. I am ready to record a podcast. Usual ground rules apply as always. But this time I'll probably, since what I'm actually going to do is do a feedback episode. I've collected some feedback over the last few episodes of the show or, pertaining to the last few episodes. So if you chime in with feedback live on Twitch, I will, of course, also consider that because, feedback is feedback and live feedback is also very cool. So let's see if I got everything, if I've got everything set up right here. Let's do a little test recording. Zoom in a little bit. Right, sounds about right. What's the music say? Looks good. All right. What does it sound like? That looks good. All right. If we're all ready, I shall commence with the show then. It's late enough already. Let's get this done. You're listening to The Private Citizen, defending your right to have something to hide. This is episode 127 for Wednesday, the 12th of October, 2022. Special military operation. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is Fab. I'm coming to you live from Düsseldorf in Germany. And tonight we're going to talk about, your feedback. We're going to talk about what you wrote me. I've been announcing this for quite a while. Been teasing this. I wanted to do a full feedback episode. I've collected feedback over the last few weeks pertaining to the last few episodes. And I thought it would be neat to put you, the producers of the show, into the focus of one episode. Showcase a little bit why I like feedback so much and talk a little bit about why it's so important to me. So that's what we're going to do tonight. I'm also, as usual, as I try to do always, I'm broadcasting the recording of this live on Twitch. I'm streaming this. So we might get some live feedback from Twitch. So I invite the Twitch audience to chime in whenever they feel that is appropriate, and I will pick out important things and put them in with the rest of the feedback tonight. So that's what we are doing. I called this episode "Special Military Operation." You'll understand why when we get to the appropriate feedback. But it's just we're just doing feedback. So if you listen to the podcast and you use the podcast chapter feature and you're wondering why there are so few chapters and why does it start with producer feedback this time. This is why, because that's what we're doing tonight. So or whatever time it is. It is relatively late at night. I had a very long day today, so lots of stuff to do. I actually streamed some gaming before on Twitch and then did all kinds of other stuff. So yeah, it's kind of late at night for me. But let's get into our topic for today. And before we talk about the actual feedback, I think I want to, the feedback from you, I want to mention a little bit. I mean, I say this pretty much every show, but I kind of want to put it front and center here once more. I just wanted to mention that I appreciate your feedback a lot. And a lot of the feedback in this episode is from the forum, which is kind of my favorite feedback. And we have a forum, or I have a forum for my website, which is fab.industries, and it's at forum.fab.industries. But there is a special section for the Private Citizen podcast. And of course, you can find links to these forum topics in the show notes at privatecitizen.press. But I kind of like the forum because, it fosters kind of a community atmosphere among the producers of the show, and it kind of invites discussions which are really good. And especially on this episode, we have some really good discussions. We have some, later on we'll talk about feedback you wrote in about my discussion of current situation with Russia and Nord Stream and all of that. And we have some feedback from the Russian side. And we have some feedback from the other side, from people who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to NATO. So that's very interesting. I have some very cool listeners with very interesting jobs that have very interesting things to say. And I just appreciate this feedback. Of course, there's an email, and this is as feedback as well. You can also write me emails. Just go to privatecitizen.press. All the details about how to contact me in various ways are on there. And I also got, over this period, I got a lot of feedback that I wouldn't want to put in the show. Some of it where you specifically told me not to put it to the show, and other stuff where I thought, well, probably better not to talk about this publicly, but it is nonetheless very interesting insight. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that as well. If you just write to me privately, write me a private message on the forum, or in some cases on Twitter, or just write me an email. Of course, you can write me encrypted email as well. Once again, privatecitizen.press has all the details. So for this episode, I have feedback on episodes 122, 123, 124, 125, and the previous episode 126. So we're gonna talk about all these episodes, and let's start with episode 122, Drachenlord Defeated, where I once again talked about Rainer Winkler, aka Drachenlord, the German YouTuber. And of course, if this is kind of your first episode of the podcast, if you're joining us, if you do, welcome. You're very welcome. But this is probably not the best episodes to start with. You should probably start at 122, for this episode to make any sense. So that's just as a little tip here from me in the beginning. Anyway, on episode 122 on the forum, Astral C said the following: I saw Count Dankula's coverage on Drachenlord, and he posts a link to a video by Count Dankula, who is one of the few English YouTubers or English-speaking YouTubers who's covered Drachenlord. There was another guy whose name escapes me right now, who also went to visit Drachenlord and who Drachenlord shouted at for being a hater. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, the Count Dankula video is quite good. As Lucy also notes that it came out on the same day as the podcast. I think that is probably coincidence. Anyway, so he says, I saw Count Dankula's coverage on Drachenlord. After watching this, I also want to shout, Rainer, you fucking idiot. Dude is taking the worst possible choice in every case. I'm still amazed on how some celebrities, famous or infamous, internet or otherwise, can self-destruct in such spectacular ways. I don't think this way in which Drachenlord has self-destructed is, to me, not a very celebrity kind of way of self-destructing. It's arguable if he's a celebrity or not. I think he definitely has some, he's definitely a person of interest, as we put it in Germany, as far as private, the right to be photographed in public or something like that is concerned. But I don't think he's really a celebrity, and he's not like self-destructing in a celebrity way, the kind of drugs, alcohol excesses, marriage falling apart kind of thing. But he's definitely, yes, he seems to, as Lucy puts it very aptly, always taking the worst possible choice, whatever he's doing. And to me, I've talked about this guy several times, several aspects of the story, because I think it's a very interesting story. And it's something that I think will, it's a very German thing, but will, this kind of situation will happen in other places as well. And it's very, very poignant as to, how people are treated on the internet and on all this kind of thing, and hate speech. And if you listen to me talk about him, you might have heard me kind of struggling, because in one sense, I kind of sympathize with Rainer, because one aspect of his character, which is this, I'm doing something and I believe in it, and people tell me I'm shit, and I will not stop because of that, right? I'll persevere, is something I generally admire. And it's probably a character trait I have as well. But on the other hand, seeing what that did to him is also very healthy, I think, for me, because it definitely shows how you can take this kind of attitude way too far, and you can really destroy your life by doing this. So it's kind of a cautious tale, I think. But on the other hand, I also have absolutely no sympathy with him. I have sympathy with that attitude, but it ends there, because I, in just consuming like hundreds of, probably now thousands of hours of this guy's content, I've also seen what a horrible guy he is. Yes, he had a terrible childhood, and been a terrible time at school. But that is no excuse for just being I would almost say a disgusting kind of person, because, if you hear this guy talk, especially about women, when he talks about women, I've never seen, outside of a parody context, I don't think I've ever seen anybody being that objectifying of women, right? If people complain about treatment of women in video games, just listen to some of the things this person has said. It's just horrible. Like, he treats women just like they're basically just there for cheap enjoyment and to birth children, basically just like birthing chambers and pleasure holes. Basically, that's really how he thinks, and he says this. He's shown this a lot of times. Like, he just recently, like last week, he put out a video on TikTok. So he's back on TikTok. He put out a video where he just said he just wants some women to, or he's looking for a woman to make children with. And the way he says it, it's just so like disgustingly condescending. It's like unbelievable. And I really think the guy thinks that way because he has no impulse control. So I think he like, when you watch his videos, he often says things that are quite horrible. And then later on, he kind of tries to gloss over them, or like he never really apologizes for them, but he kind of makes it sound like they either were a joke or he didn't mean it that way. But I think he does. I think he did, because he has horrible impulse control. He just says the things he thinks, which are often quite horrible. And it's apparent that he has no impulse control. I mean, the guy got 70,000 euros for when he sold his house, and instead of like putting some on the side or buying another house or a flat or renting a flat, he just spent everything like on computer stuff he can't use, because in a car, like he was gonna live on the road, and the worst car to be undercover with, and then some computer stuff he couldn't use because he was living in a hotel in his car. Like he just like threw that money away, and that's why I think he really thinks that way. And he's just I don't know, he's a horrible human being. That's why kind of my feeling sympathy with him like ends very quickly. And one thing I wanted to add before we go to another comment here by a listener is that this story, one of the reasons why I find this story so fascinating is not actually the story, which is a fascinating story. And it's just as you just facepalm all the time, right? Like watch that Count Dankula video. It's the same thing, right? It's when you hear about him, you just what he does and his shenanigans. You see, like there's a reason people say they're writers in this Drachen game. The as if this was a reality TV show, because you see this stuff and you're like, this can't be real. So it's a good story, but I find it much more interesting because it's a very good example. I mean, I talked recently, I think that was the previous episode about journalism. And yeah, that was about fear-based journalism, but I've talked a lot about how journalism is bad, right? And the Drachenlord story is just a perfect example, because it is amazing how wrong the press gets this, and the press, because the press has created this misunderstanding about this whole situation in the public's eye, because the public obviously just reads what the press says about Drachenlord, and the press is just very wrong on him, right? Because they just watch a video or two of him and they take a lot of what he says at face value, and which is understandable, because when he talks about how he's bullied and what the people do to him, that is true, right? I mean, not the bullying part, because that is something you have to evaluate, but what the people do to him, the horrible stuff that people do to him, is real, right? And that happens, and you can check that as the press. And then the press doesn't go any further, and they don't spend the time of just watching the videos he put out, like what actually caused people to react that way. They just assume people are horrible, and there's hate speech on the internet's horrible, which to a certain degree is true, but the problem is that they don't understand what this guy actually did to make so many people hate him. And to me, the obvious thing, the first thing I did is when I watched, when I got into the story and started watching some YouTube videos on it, was let's actually go and look up what the guy does, like what's his content. And of course, it's a little bit hard, because most of it is now it's certainly deleted off YouTube, but even like a year ago, it was like, he deletes his own stuff and stuff gets deleted, but it's all archived anywhere in places, and it's very easy to find. It's like literally one search away, and you can watch all the stuff. Like you can watch his old videos, you can watch the famous video where he said, come to my place and I'll beat you up. Ich mach's euch die Prügel raus. It's all there, and it's like really easy. Like it's not like, as a journalist you have to go somewhere and like do some actual research. You just have to sit in front of your computer and watch a few hours of YouTube videos, and then you suddenly realize like that there's much more to the story. Now, but the press hasn't done that. It is consistently not doing that. The press is really shit on the story. And that shows that, like, I mean, this is the story where the actual research is really easy, because you literally just have to go to a website and watch some videos. And it's so interesting, because anybody, this podcast is about thinking for yourself and doing your own research, and you can do that with this topic very easily. And then you can figure out, oh man, the press really is shit, and what Fab's saying maybe isn't that wrong, and that gets you thinking, because on other stories where, like, journalists have to be a little bit investigative and have to do some research and have to get to some sources that normal people usually can't get to. Those are the stories where you have to trust these people, right? But how can you trust them if on a simple story like this, where the research is much easier, they get it wrong, which you can check, right? And all of these journalists, I don't think they realize they're basically operating on this assumption that nobody will ever check what they do. But the internet has enabled people to do this more easily on stories, and it just shows how large parts of the press are just doing a horrible job, which pains me to say as a journalist, but that's the way it is. It's like the typical thing, when you listen to press reports on the topic you know anything about, you often think like they have no idea what they're talking about. And then if you get to thinking, maybe this also happens on the topics that I can't check them on because I don't know anything about, it gets really scary. But anyway, we also had a comment from India Charlie, who added to what Astro C said. And India Charlie said the following: I'm from the UK and had never heard of Drachenlord, so I found the podcast on him very interesting. I'll also check out the video linked above, so the video Astro C linked. As Astro C has said, it's amazing that some people, when faced with a choice, seem to keep taking the worst option each time. I try to make sensible choices in life, so it's a very odd concept. Yeah, it's with Drachenlord, it's a very singular story. When I say this is going to become interesting, something like this is going to happen in other countries, I mean, like the very high level internet hate speech debate about situations like this. I just strongly believe something like Drachenlord will never happen again. This guy is a singular situation, and the amount of times he fucks up, and like the predictable way in which he always fucks up again and again in the same way, even though, like, okay, he's not listening to people telling him because he thinks everybody who even criticizes him even in a productive way is a hater. But like, even without listening, after like 10 years of doing the same thing, it's like that definition of insanity is like, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's kind of what he's doing. And it's kind of weird. Next show title, The Drachenlord Singularity, says Jonathan MH. Yeah, that's actually not bad. Although that sounds even more scary. That sounds like either, the guy weighs 200 kilograms, right? Either he's gotten so fat that he's collapsed into himself and just sucking the universe in. Or like, I don't know, his idiocy has reached a concentration level where it's just collapsing reality around him. Actually, that's not a bad novel idea. Let's move on. I already have a novel that I'm working on. I don't need another one. Let's talk about episode 123, Electrical Network Frequency Analysis. Redeemer F said, "Wow, this really sounds like science fiction. Thank you for sharing this. I haven't heard about it before." Well, I'm glad you got something out of the show. And then Petit Michel added, I also found it very interesting. I was wondering if similar techniques could be used to estimate location within a region, not simply 50 versus 60 hertz. Because there's 50 and 60 hertz regions around the world. I talked about that in that episode. All the episodes are linked in the show notes, by the way. Private Citizen Press, if you want to refresh your memory. There does seem to be research in this area, and he quotes on a paper that he also linked. So, quote, "The main focus of this report is to answer the question whether it is also possible to accurately determine the location of a video or audio recording with the ENF information when the ENF information is available. The first attempt to localize a recording was done in 2013. Inspired by their findings, a theoretical framework is proposed to gain insight into the observation that the ENF signal is not exactly equal at all locations of an interconnected grid. Next three different localization methods are compared. Finally, the new findings are discussed and recommendations for future research are given." It's very interesting. I actually looked into this paper a bit. Very, very cool. This is why I like the forum so much, because people link stuff like that. And, you can also send me emails, but this is cool because other people can also then check that out. And I found this very, very interesting. Also very scary because, the thing when I thought about that episode afterwards, and I was like, yeah, so this electrical network frequency analysis is a very cool and interesting technology. As I discussed in the shows, basically analyzing the 50 or 60 hertz hum in a audio recording and then figuring out if it was edited and exactly when it was recorded. Pretty cool and has some interesting, like spy intelligence service applications. But I think it's just an example. It's just one example we know about. Just imagine like all the myriad different other hacks you can probably do on digital information that we just like spew out all of our lives. It's very scary, like with the resources of somebody like the NSA or like the FSB. Just imagine what they can do with this shit. Yeah, very scary. Let's move on to episode 124, When Doing the Right Thing Actually Isn't, which was about the Stephanie Sterling versus Domina death thing. And we have here a very, very personal, but also like courageous and a very interesting email. Forum post, even from Bazawil, which I just want to read out in full, because I thought it was very interesting. So Bazawil says, I'm writing feedback on this episode, mostly to talk about myself, which is fair. I like to hear about my producers, and Bazawil's been around for a very long time. I think I agree with most of the points you made, but I have a few pieces of nuance to add. However, first about me, I very recently identify as non-binary. This is something I've wanted to share with this community, but it did not come up in general conversation and I did not feel the need to drop it into conversation out of context, as in Star Trek Discovery. Oh, by the way, I'm pansexual. Technically, I identify as a bearded autistic man that wears a dress. However, I use the identifier genderqueer, which pretty much sums up my outward gendered appearance as weird, which I'm okay with. Makes sense. The reason for including autistic here is that I inwardly kind of identify as male, but not a typical male. Okay. I can't comment on the autistic thing because, while I know, about the... the condition, I kind of don't understand how that fits into a person's gender identity, I guess gender identity is just a part of your identity in general, right? And if you have a condition, is it okay to call it? I guess yes, right. If you have a condition like that, it would very clearly influence your identity. So kind of makes sense. The other problem I have with autistic is just that it's hard to grasp for me. It's a very broad term that is like I have more success with understanding the actual more medical like definitions of certain conditions. Autistic, it's often called the autistic spectrum, is very like broad to me. Like if I read about that, and I'm by far not a specialist, but if I read about that, some of the like milder cases, I would like identify with myself. Like some of that stuff, I would think, when they describe how, especially children in school, if they have mild autism, like how they react to other kids, I was certainly the same way. But I wouldn't call myself autistic because of it. I just think it's just a spectrum of how people are. People are just incredibly different, right? And maybe it was just back in the day, you would just call somebody like that shy at that point, or like nerdy, or whatever. Jonathan M. Hitai, chiming in via Twitch, also often an autism marker, different understanding of social constructs. Maybe that's why you think I'm autistic. I don't understand social constructs. Maybe, but like that's another thing. Like, a lot of people don't understand social constructs or understand them differently, right? Some people are just, the traditional way of saying would be like socially awkward, right? When is that autism and when it's like socially awkward? The spectrum is really broad. See, that's kind of my problem. If you have a definition that's so broad, it's kind of hard to use when you talk about it, right? Because you don't know what are you talking about. So this is my problem with, it's not really a problem, but this is like what I'm thinking when Basil says that. Although, I kind of understand that it's kind of part of your identity. So, but that's, I don't know. Really dumb example would be I'm a Trekkie, right? At what point does that become part of my gender identity, right? It could be a kink, right? I could be really attracted to people in Star Trek uniforms, which I think is a thing. Is that part of my? I don't know. If I start wearing a Star Trek uniform all day, am I then suddenly queer, or am I just weird, or am I autistic? It's like kind of hard. Jonathan says he said the name right. So, that's... I'm trying my best. It's really... That name is like, as the Zoomers say, real talk. That name is incredibly hard for some reason, but only because I'm in English mode when I do the show, right? Like German names, and especially like that Hetai, it's just... I just go to heavy immediately because it kind of looks British. It's just it's not personal, Jonathan. Really, it isn't. But anyway, let's continue with what Baza was saying. Also, I would like to say, Baza, I have a lot of respect for you being so frank with this and also in a public forum. I think it's really cool. You definitely have my respect for this. Anyway, he continues. Okay, enough about me. Firstly, let's talk about content creators that publicly espouse transphobic or other poor behaviors. There are two examples of this in my life: Harry Potter and Jk Rowling, who is a known TERF. TERF is, oh god, I'm gonna have to search this because I'm gonna mess this up. What it actually stands for. I know what it is, but I have to trans exclusionary radical feminist. Okay, right. I have to disagree with Baza on some of this, but let's hear him out first. Who's a known TERF and transphobe, and Joss Whedon for his alleged behavior with actors. Harry Potter is not a deep fandom of mine, but I enjoy the films. However, Joss's entire canon are formative works from my childhood. Well, aim to misbehave. Both of these works I have no problem continuing to enjoy and separating the people from their work. I think it's very healthy, actually. And enjoying the work of other good humans. Sometimes I wish there was a way to continue to support these works while not contributing to the coffers of Jk Rowling or Joss, but that might not be possible. While there is, albeit tiny, direct link to transphobia in the case of this video game, which the episode was about, I do not agree with Valve's censorship other than to remove all reference of this language if possible or appropriate. I've not actually gone and read what was written, which I don't think you don't actually need to. It doesn't also really matter, to be honest. When it comes to this, I mean, it was bad enough that that is debatable whether it should be removed or not, and was really the point. When it comes to this level of censorship, I do not agree. I believe that in some cases it might be appropriate to self-censor, not necessarily in a cancel culture way, but there can be situations where, as a personal choice, you may not buy a game, or you might otherwise enjoy it if you did not want to support the individual person. You not buy a game you might otherwise enjoy if you did not want to support the individual person. But that is up to me as an individual, not a company, to make a choice for me. Yeah, I think that's very healthy. Let me just go back to the Harry Potter and Jk Rowling thing. So I personally, this is my personal opinion on this. I mean, I've read Harry Potter. This was like, God, when was this? Basically, when the books came out. I wouldn't really have considered myself a fan, but I really liked her writing and her books. And I don't care about all the other. I mean, I watched the films, but I really liked the books. The books are really cool. And then after that, it kind of got relatively unimportant to me. but I have a little bit of a problem with this term TERF, because I do understand her point of view in a certain way. Let me explain. Okay, so in an old school feminist way, right? And I'm talking the generation of my mother, basically. Largely people that were involved in the 70s and the 80s. In women's rights, and specifically in women's rights. We're talking in Germany, fights that were political fights that were going on for a long time, and to some degree are still going on now, about women, to have the right to have an abortion and stuff like that. There's still an article in German criminal law that criminalizes. Abortions are legal, but what's criminalized is advertising them, which is really dumb, and is like an article that we should have gotten rid of like ages ago, because we do not have a really political debate about this in Germany. This is not the same a debate as in the US. Like even very conservative, traditionally religious people in Germany, so I'm talking Christians, right? These days there is also a somewhat prevalent Muslim minority, but leaving them out, and we're talking Christians, and we're talking the Roman Catholic Church. Even with those groups, it is largely accepted that this kind of thing should be okay. Abortion should be a choice of the person, and definitely, why not advertise them? Why can't a doctor say, hey, I perform abortions? So it's not that much of a fought battle, but it was, right? And for these people, I don't know, because I haven't been really into this. I've just seen this. I haven't really deeply researched this. And so I don't know how transphobic J.K. Rowling is. I've certainly seen some things she said, which were interpreted in that way. But for me, you can also interpret them as somebody, she is, how old is J.K. Rowling? Let me look this up. J.K. Rowling was born in 1965. So she's a bit younger than my mother. She's about, I would say, 10 years younger than my mother, more than 10 years, but yeah, okay. But she's definitely like, if you grew up around that, let's just play devil's advocate and consider her an old school feminist. There is a viewpoint where there have been hard-fought political battles that were specifically for women's rights. And I don't understand why a person is demonized for having a certain opinion. And if your opinion is that, for example, you could have the opinion that you're fighting for specifically for women's rights, and you just don't care for trans rights. There are people who care about that, but you personally don't. Like, your point is, you're fighting for women's rights, and women still in our society, like that could be your standpoint, still aren't on this, they still aren't equal with men, and so that fight isn't over, and the trans right fight is distracting from that. Now, I don't agree with that personally, but I can see how somebody could be of that opinion, and I do also sympathize with some of her or what I've seen her say in statements, because I am somebody, I'm by no means transphobic. Right? I'm not afraid of trans people. I think trans people should exist. I support their choice to, whatever they want to do. If you're born with a certain set of genitalia and you want to change that, or you feel differently, I support all of that. But I am a person who is grounded in science, or I try to be. I'm also somebody who's married to a biologist. And a thing that totally, gets my gander, or as the kids these days would probably say, triggers me to no end, is when there are certain people who fight for trans rights who basically try to deny that sex, so biological gender, is a thing, or that it is important. And yes, I understand, that biologically speaking, there are more than two genders, right? Certainly with animals, and I don't know if it gets much weirder when you go into plants, but let's talk about animals. And there's certainly with humans also, there's edge cases, right? There's people who have no genitalia. There's people who have two sets of genitalia. There's all kinds of stuff. There's chromosomes. There's people who have all different kinds of chromosomes. But in a statistically, if you look at the human population in statistically, no, I've forgotten the word. Statistical relevant analysis of the human population, there is two biological sexes, and there's a very specific function why there's a good scientific reason why it is that way, because humans procreate. It doesn't mean all humans have to procreate or can or should, whatever, but biologically speaking, there is a very, very discrete set of sexes there, and there are always edge cases with everything. Biological organisms are very complicated. There are all kinds of mutations. There's all kinds of stuff that can happen. There could be evolutionary stresses to create a third sex. All kinds of stuff. But I just really, really dislike people who try to brush that aside and go, that is all not important. And people who pretend that, for example, men and women are the same. They are not. They're biologically not. Their whole endocrine system is completely different, right? Their hormonal balances is different. That doesn't mean you can't change that. That doesn't mean you can't go through a gender transition. But I've talked to. The funny thing is, the trans people I really respect, and I respect their opinion. They say the same thing. If you, for example, you're born as a male and you want to become a female, you learn very quickly about hormones and what kind of changes you have to go through, and that there is a definite difference. And I just don't like the people who try to negate that. I'm not saying Bethel Will's doing that. I'm not saying, I'm just saying some of the stuff that I've seen that J.K. Rowling said, where she was then, named a transphobe and a TERF, specifically on Twitter, was just stuff that to me were just biological facts. And then there was some stuff that were opinions, where I do know, I also personally know some feminists who are very specifically only feminists. They're not trans rights proponents. They don't care about trans rights. They don't care about gay rights. They just care about women's rights, and they don't actually care about sex, unless it's sexual harassment or whatever. And I think that is a very specific thing to do. And on top of that, there's also things you have to. I have some feedback here on Twitch, which I get into. Let me just finish my point here. There's also two things about J.K. Rowling specifically and Joss Whedon. I'm okay with if you think J.K. Rowling is a transphobe, and that's an opinion you can have. I personally, I don't know. I haven't looked into this. I don't really care. With Joss Whedon's a bit different, but with J.K. Rowling, I don't care. But she is definitely. She has done some things for gay rights. She has specifically put a very prominent gay character into a children's book. It's debate. I wouldn't say she was trailblazing in that or whatever. I actually had this discussion with my wife a while ago where she was like, well, that's no thing. Other people have done that before. But I was like, at this point, when she did this, these books were massively popular. So she had a huge audience and she did this. And I think actually, it was probably a good thing for representation at that point, but it was specifically gay representation. Same thing with Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon has a big history of just supporting feminism, not only supporting feminist charities, but also creating like very strong and very good, like unlike many screenwriters these days, very good female characters. Not only in Buffy, which was never really my thing, but Firefly is one example, and he's done some very smart writing around women's rights, especially in Firefly. So he definitely has done some for that. That doesn't mean the whole thing he's been accused of isn't bad or horrible, or I believe hasn't happened. I mean, the thing is, people are what we're discussing is people are very great. It's not like Hollywood, like where you Darth Vader or you Obi-Wan Kenobi. People are very complex, and they can be good in one aspect, and then there can be shitty people in other aspects. It's kind of like Drachenlord. I don't think the guy is completely horrible. As I said, I think he has some he's in some aspects, he's a disgusting, horrible being. But in other aspects, it's like, oh, I kind of feel with that guy, because it's like, this part really isn't his fault. Or like he's just like being a bit dumb here, but like, I'm kind of feel sorry for him. So it's like, it isn't black and white. And that's why I think what Bazawul says, that, I can still enjoy these people's works, that's a really, like, I think, grown up thing to do. And I try to do that. I love the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. Now, H.P. Lovecraft was a fucking racist, which in many ways wasn't his fault. That was just his time. But when you read these books today, you go like, or these stories, you go like, holy shit, that is fucking, you like, compared to what other people say, some stuff on TV these days is racist. Like, that is some actual fucking racism. Orson Scott Card was a horrible person in some respects, but he wrote some really good stuff. Now, there's also other examples. There's people who are just bad. Like L. Ron Hubbard, right, was a horrible person in almost all respects, and his writing is fucking horrible as well. But yeah, I think things are often very gray, and it's very hard and a very adult thing to do, to divorce stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of like some people were really shocked when the Adam Baldwin, who plays Jane on Firefly, like has some political views that a lot of progressive people really don't like, and then like the immature, childish teenager way to deal with that is, I fucking hate this. I hate Firefly now. Whereas Firefly is still a good show, and he plays a good character, and he plays that character very well. I mean, you don't have to like that person, right? It's kind of like my favorite movie of all time is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now, Clint Eastwood is an amazing actor. And then for what he does, he's the best. There's nobody who's ever approached The Man with No Name, like in the way, like Quentin Tarantino has tried his whole career to create a character that is that cool, and he just doesn't get close to it by even a continent. And he doesn't have actors that are that good. I'm sorry, I don't like Quentin Tarantino, and almost all of his movies, pretty much all. But that doesn't mean I like Clint Eastwood or his opinions. That I can divorce that. Anyway, we had some stuff here on Twitch chat. Jonathan says, as far as a fake, as far as I know, Jk Rowling just says trans women aren't women, so not differentiate in gender and sex. Yeah, and that's something I can, like, you can. I think that's a valid opinion to have. That depends on how you interpret this, right? If you interpret this on a very specific scientific biological way, then she could be right. It also very much depends on the trans woman, but like, and that's the problem I have with some of these people as well. I probably would be called turf, except I'm not a radical feminist. Well, I wouldn't be. I'm a man. But I would agree. Yes, like certain trans women, in a biological sense, where you define, are you a man or a woman by biological sexual characteristics, as you learn in school, like primary sexual organs, and your hormonal situation. Then if you to put it easily, if you have a penis and you don't have a vagina and you have a lot of testosterone in your blood, then yes, biologically you're a man. But I think the whole gender thing to me is I think it's just that the terming and how people discuss it is wrong. Like I don't like this whole the way people discuss that. I would just say, I mean, who cares? Right? Who cares what you biologically are? If you want to wear a dress and you want to call yourself whatever, I mean, I don't give a damn. Who, and then if Jk Rowling gives a damn, I won't give a damn about her. Anyway, Plusmid says, no, don't try to get cancelled. I'm just kidding. Don't worry. Dude, I've been, I've literally one of my episodes of this podcast was deleted off YouTube because YouTube was of the opinion that I was saying things about the pandemic that were contradicting what the World Health Organization said, which was obviously completely bullshit, because the only thing I did was talk about the side effects I had after receiving my first vaccination, which was factual, and I have pictures of the rash that goes down to my primary sexual organs. But I've been in this situation before, so let's not worry. Jonathan says, which is why you differentiate between gender and sex. Easy. Your example is like saying, are you a man? You must want to bang women. Well, kind of no, because like you don't differentiate between gender and sex really, because those are very two. Like to me, that just doesn't mix. Right? I mean, that's two very different things. Who you want to fuck and what you feel like as your identity, to me, has no bearing on what your biological sex is. And I think that is the thing. That is the thing that's hard to get across, which most people can't, because they're like, so we're all about gender, so biological sex doesn't matter, right? That was basically. I did actually have in university, and this was 2005, 2006. I actually had one semester of gender studies in English literature, which they were just starting, and I was just constantly fighting with the professor or the tutor. She wasn't a professor actually, because she was constantly saying things like this, and I was like, no, there is a thing like biological gender, and yes, women and men are very different. I mean, you can kind of try to get away with this in a literal, in an English lit course, but then if you have somebody there who actually paid attention in biology class in high school, then they can pull you up on your bullshit. So for me, it's just not like that's like why does that even matter? Like what's the point? I mean, isn't the whole thing about trans being open to trans people that we don't care, right? Who gives a fuck? I mean, in certain situations you care, but like those are very specific situations. Like, if you're in a club and you're like coming onto somebody, and let's say you're a man and you like to bang women who have vaginas, and you need some clear communication at that point, right? I understand that you don't want to end up with a guy in bed or with a woman or whatever they term this as. If you basically expecting a vagina and you end up with a dick, or the other way around, that is a situation you want to avoid. But that's not something we need to discuss like when it comes to like Jk Rowling's work, because like why does that even matter? That's a very specific situation that you can sort out in that situation by just communicating clearly, which people should do more. Yes. Now we have a discussion if people are swearing. I hope I'm not filtering Twitch chat. I'm trying not to. I have no moderation messages here. You should not get filtered. I hope, because I'm not a fan of this. People should speak their mind. This is why we're all here. SLC says it is also how you perceive the other. Self-identification doesn't change it. Yeah, that's another aspect of it. If it looks like a duck, yeah, that's the other aspect of it, right? People, I think, people that are like very pro-trans and like on Twitter, and they post all this shit. I think they often don't understand that. Often how you perceive yourself, doesn't matter to a lot of the world out. Like when you go out in the real world, how you perceive yourself and how other people perceive yourself will kind of clash. And the more, let's put it this way, it's the more eccentric you are in how you perceive yourself, the more that will clash with a majority of the people who are very set in their ways. That's just how like society generally is, right? And that doesn't even have anything to do with gender identity. If to continue my earlier example, if I just like to wear Starfleet uniforms and I will now go out on the street here in Düsseldorf and start wearing Starfleet uniform, that will clash with people's expectation of what people should do, and when I'm doing this, I mean, I fully support anybody to do this. More people should wear Starfleet uniforms all the time because they look good. But you have to realize that will clash with reality, and depending on where you are, it will clash more. In Düsseldorf, people will look at me funny or even ask me or make fun of me. Probably in London, nobody would have cared. In London, in the tube, you can do whatever you want. You can literally have a chicken on your head, and nobody would even like look at you twice because it's London. So it's like that. Johnson also says kind of exactly how it works. Also, how I can change my legal gender in Denmark from my desk through an online service. But that's like that's another thing. Like why, why does that even matter? Is my question. Like why does the government even need to know your legal gender? Like they just need a field you can put in somewhere how you want to be addressed, and if you want to be addressed as Supreme Star Lord, I mean, why not? It's not really. It's kind of like the German ID card doesn't have your religion for historic reasons, but it really shouldn't. Like what? How does the government care? Anyway, let's continue with. I'm completely on a tangent here, but I think it's an interesting discussion. But let's continue with what Bezalel said here. There was a last point. Yes, last point. There was something that came up for me when you talked about subtle versus overt representation. I think I agree with your overall sentiment, but I wanted to add one point. As a non-binary, bisexual, autistic man, I have recently come to realize that many TV shows and movies have not represented me up to very recently. There are a number of shows I have watched recently that have done an excellent job of representing autistic, trans, non-binary, and other sexuality, etc. in an excellent way. There are also some others who have done it in a tokenistic, terrible way. When this is done well, it has a profound effect on me. To actually be seen on screen is so moving. I understand that. My problem in general is that I think writing these days isn't really good. So they often fuck that up. In my opinion, see Star Trek Discovery. I mean, Star Trek Discovery, actually, Basil said in this comment as well, I kind of cut that out, but he said he liked Star Trek Discovery. I'd be very interested to hear why and maybe discuss it if possible, because I'm really interested in that. Because for example, I think the Discovery completely botched this because, I mean, the whole Michael Burnham thing from the beginning, it's obvious to me that they wanted to have a transgender character and then pulled the punch. And then just ended up with like a normal female character. It just has a male first name for some weird reason, because Vulcans can't tell them apart or whatever. It just like, that was just horrible to me. And a lot of the other stuff, just because, but that's just because Discovery's writing is bad. I mean, the Star Trek writing is also bad. I mean, they don't even know what a turbolift looks like, or how much space there should be for a turbolift in the ship, even though they could just get the TNG technical manual, which I have on my desk here somewhere, and then they would figure that out. But I mean, I understand that, but like the other thing is, I think just a lot of the writing is bad, and I understand how empowering it can be to be represented, but I do think that in a lot of, well, in certain productions, they're just trying to overdo it, and it's kind of it's a laudable goal, but you also have to realize that you are a very specific audience, right? It's kind of, for me, this might be a bad example, but like for me, I had kind of the opposite example, because I like to watch a lot of, English TV shows and have done so for like, 30 years or longer. And to me, it was always, I like history stuff, right? So I like World War II movies, for example. But to me, as a German, I always find like there's not enough representation. Like the representation of Germans in World War II is just horrible. Like they're just all like Nazis, and it's like the writing's really bad most of the time. They're just the evil Nazis. Whereas it's a very, very nuanced thing, and because my grandfather was in the Waffen SS, to me this is a very interesting topic, and I personally would like to see more depictions of like Germans in World War II. I mean, Das Boot, which is by it's not really an accident that's made by Germans, but that's a very interesting coverage of something like this, right? Where it's like it's very nuanced, and they have like there's this very specific Nazi characters, and he's actually in the party, on board, and then most of the other guys are just like, they're just soldiers, and then there's interesting stuff about that. So I find that kind of interesting. But I always understood that I'm a German, right? And these TV shows are made for Americans and English people. So I'm kind of like, I understand that I'm not the audience, or just a very small part of the audience, and that's why they won't have characters like that. I find it laudable when it happens, but I really understand why that often isn't the case. And I feel like sometimes people like, trans people are a small minority. It's kind of like, it's understandable that is not often, like even gay people are a minority when it comes to society. And I think often progressive people kind of forget this. I mean, there is a reason that there are very specific gender roles in most literary works, and that's because a lot of these roles just apply to a majority of the population, right? The majority of the population is just heterosexual, straight. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be other media, but like there is, to me, it's understandable that like that media is the same percentage as that demographic is, right? So I don't know. Let's say we're talking Hollywood and US, and like let's say like 2%, which is probably way overinflated, but let's say 2% of the American population is trans, right? Then to me it would be normal if 2%, like it would be understandable, then 2%, maybe more, maybe 5% of all the stuff on television has some kind of representation. And, if you take the works of the last 20 years, it's probably right because there wasn't much representation. And I'm all for like representation, but it has to fit it has to fit what you're doing. And that's often my problem. It's often not done well, right? And like it's often like it needs to like it has a place in Star Trek, for example, especially like Star Trek is prime material for this kind of thing, and Star Trek always had like since TNG, like since the original series, it's always had like it's always made like gender roles part of its story, and in TNG even more. I recently mentioned that episode with Riker and like the person from the planet where they don't have genders, stuff like that. But like they've done it well and in a good way. And I would have expected Discovery, if it was a good Star Trek show, to do it in the same way. And they just like ham-fisted, just slap it on there, and it's just like it's like and they botch it every time. There's just the normal, like just the easiest thing would be if you look at TOS, right? All the important bridge officers are male, ignoring the cage. Let's look at the series, the original series, and then in Next Generation it gets a bit better. And then in Deep Space Nine, it gets a bit better. And then in Voyager, it gets better, right? But the thing to do it, if you do a new Star Trek show, is you make a new Star Trek show that's set after Voyager, and you make it a lot better than Voyager, right? But in a way where it's still maybe we're getting to a point now where it's just like in Discovery they went too far. There's like more. I think there's a lot. They do this on purpose. There's lots of more women characters. I think you should get to a point, me personally, where it's equal, where people are equal, and then you have a show that's set after Voyager where people are equal, and then you can have commentary why it took till 2350 or whatever for this to happen. And then you can maybe even write a smart episode or two about that, why it took that long, right? But like the Star Trek people are dumb. They're now doing shows set before the original series, where like the bridge crew of a starship is all female, right? And then if you would watch that in continuation, you'd watch like The Cage, and then you'd watch like Discovery or whatever, and then you'd or Strange New Worlds, and then you'd watch TOS, and then you go, how did this whole like society went from we're making incredibly sexist jokes to and there's only male people in or almost only male people in leading positions, i.e. The Cage, to there's women everywhere, and now we're making sexist jokes about men, to we're back to there's only men on the bridge and making sexist jokes about women in TOS again. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, they're doing this in the dumbest way you could possibly do this, even though it would be so easy to do right. And that's what I'm trying to say. I think I'm all for more representation, but it has to be done like anything. It has to be done smart. Like when you're producing and I'm thinking about this a lot. I'm writing a fucking novel. When you're producing a work, like a work of entertainment, be it a novel, a TV show, a movie, whatever, you're doing this to entertain people, right? You can, on the side, also put like some political notions you find interesting in there. But the really good authors do that without you as a reader or as a listener or as a viewer even realizing. And these days, I don't know. I think most writers have forgotten how to do that properly, which is bad. Anyway, Basil, I'd love to know why you like Discovery, and I mean this really. I don't want to like read out your opinion and dump on it. I'm really interested in. Maybe we can have like a discussion on the forum or an email or whatever and discuss this a little bit because, I mean, you obviously have a very different perspective. And I also wanted to say incredible courage of just putting yourself out there like that. I find that is awesome. And I hope, you've probably done your own thing for, representation. Maybe somebody reads this among the or listens to this now among the listeners of the show and thinks, wow, that actually gives me some courage to, put myself out there for this stuff. I believe, we're all humans, I think. Well, that is and that is for me what Star Trek is about, right? And then we're not even all humans. We're also Romulans and Klingons and Vulcans, and we're all very different. But that whole thing, like Klingons and Romulans and Vulcans, is really just a metaphor for humanity. We're all incredibly different, but the amazing Gene Roddenberry Star Trek, not the fucking Jeff Roddenberry or whatever, his fucking son who ruined everything. Gene Roddenberry Star Trek was a world where everybody, all us humans, could get along. And that's an utopia. That is something that will probably never happen, but it's something to aspire to. And something I aspire to. Like, we're all very different, but we can all wear along. You like to wear a dress. I like to wear Starfleet uniform. More power to both of us. And more power to the people who just like to wear jeans or a fucking suit. I mean, who cares? I think, to be honest, you and me were both a lot more interesting than those people, and I really like to spend more time with people that are interesting. But, takes all sorts, and we should just, it all boils down to we should just respect each other. And that's what I think. And now, actually, I didn't turn those off, so you have to. I have to actually fix this in post because stupid user, thanks for subscribing. And luckily I have this on another sound track, so I can just pull that out and fix that in post. So I thank you very much for subscribing. I appreciate it very much, and I'll kind of fit it with data there. Indie Gaming Access. That sub scared me. That wasn't even the scariest. I mean, the raid alert is a lot more. That was just incoming transmission. All right. Now I have to get back. What was the? Oh God, I have no idea what I said. See, now you've like kind of just destroyed everything. No, it's kind of my fault. Let's listen to what I've said last. That's what I think. And with that, let's move on to episode 125. What happened with Nord Stream? We got some interesting discussions on that, so let's get into that. Also on the forum, we first had Redeemer F saying, thank you for the very interesting analysis. I missed the news, so it was a surprise for me. Unfortunately, this will have a grave impact on Germany and Europe in general, and I worry that it will have the effect to push us further into the worst situation. Finally, thank you also for the very apt and nice song. I don't know. I'm kind of, this is about like, the oil pipeline Nord Stream and the gas pipeline, being attacked and kind of destroyed, or parts of it. I don't know. I think actually the destruction of the gas pipeline won't have any. I mean, it's weirdly. It's weirdly unimportant because it was already off and not being used. So that was kind of my point, right? The only one who really has a loss here is Russia, because they could have used it as a bargaining chip, which makes it weird if Russia blew it up. Which, by the way, as I record this, we know nothing else except what I said in that episode. Nothing came out at all about this. So no idea. But like it has a very bad effect in just that it's a political escalation, right? Although I'm not. I mean, it's just one. I mean, Ukraine blowing up that bridge on the Crimea that goes to the Crimea Peninsula is kind of like the same thing, right? It just happens. It's war. We have more and more escalations like this. Sadly, that's how it goes. I don't even know how important this specific one was, but I'm happy that you liked the analysis and also the song. Replying to this Necros said, I listened to the episode on a plane today, and I must say I rather agree with your analysis. It doesn't fit USA's modus operandi. It doesn't make sense strategically for Russia, and I didn't even suspect Ukraine until I listened to the episode because I don't believe they could have possibly pulled it off. I also wholeheartedly agree with the qui prodest, so who benefits, or that qui prodest is the most adequate way of solving this puzzle. However, I must point out that while Russia's lack of strategic sense in doing a thing like that is obvious, it doesn't really indemnify Russia per se. Russia has been making moves that make no strategic sense, and actually a strategic disaster left, right, and center lately. One could easily argue that the very launch of the special military operation, asterisk, being a Russian citizen and a Russian resident, I can end up in jail for calling it a war. Which is why he didn't. It's a special military operation. The very launch of the special military operation was strategically insane from the start. Also, I forgot to mention, awesome music track on this one. I like that people like my music choice. I don't think it's insane. I think it's very reckless. But it's like, I think why people think it's insane is because it's kind of like, what it is, it's like 19th century geopolitics. Right? It's very like Napoleon. It's very it's like kind of like Kaiser Wilhelm kind of. It's reckless. Right? It's I don't think I also don't think it doesn't make any sense. I think it makes sense just from the perspective of the people doing it, which have a very different perspective than us. But they're also the people in charge, and we're the people who get shot on the front line or as civilians. So, but I get your point. Your point being, it doesn't have to make sense from our perspective. And yeah, I would kind of agree with that. And I don't know. I'm balancing my thinking is there's only really two people who have the means to pull this off, the US and the Russians. And I'm balancing mine. I don't trust the US. And I have never trusted the US. It's maybe just my generation. The previous generation in Germany was kind of like, okay, they liberated us in World War II. But my generation is kind of like, ever since September 11th, I've just watched the US doing one stupid thing after the other, so I don't trust them. They lie, they pretend they're the as they used to say in World War II, the arsenal of democracy, and then they're just droning people at their weddings, and they don't care because they're just fucking brown people who live in sand, and they rubbleize the whole country. So I don't trust the Americans, but then I also don't trust the Russians, because I think in my mind, I mean, it kind of fits their way of thinking, especially Putin. And I very, very much dislike the Soviet Union. And I think the current Russian Federation or parts of its state are way too similar to the Soviet Union, right? And there's still way too much, like, instead of Germany, who was forcibly denazified, and where you could say probably not enough because there was still a lot of ranking Nazis in the intelligence services, in the military, even in the government, but it was very, very thoroughly cleansed, as much as you can cleanse a society from something like this. And Russia has never been de-Stalinized, right? So yeah, I don't. It wouldn't surprise me either way. What would surprise me if it came out that it was the Ukrainians. Then I would really want to know how they did it. Because I don't think you can do it with like a cheap drone. Yeah. That's kind of my opinion on this. Anyway, then India Charlie added to this. Good episode, Fab, thanks. My initial view was it's the Russians, but I think you've looked at all angles and there are several possible scenarios. You make a good point that if it was Russia and they had been caught red-handed, would that be considered a strike on NATO countries' infrastructure? Probably yes. I know NATO and Russia have deconfliction teams channels, so events, in air quotes, can be discussed before they spiral out of control, but quite how that works in practice, other than it happens in private, is anyone's guess. Actually, this is a good point that I completely forgot about in all my coverage about this. Yes, that is a thing. I don't know how it works, but it is like from back in the Cold War. It is a documented thing, and it's like publicly known, right? It's like it was even in James Bond movies, like the easiest thing. In the one Bond movie, it's like the American president has like a red phone that goes directly into the Kremlin, and they had stuff like that. They had channels of, where basically the head of the Soviet Union and the U.S. president could speak and could kind of talk it out before they started the nuclear war, which makes complete sense, and which also all developed out of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think, historically, where they just didn't talk at all or enough, and it nearly destroyed all of us. So yes, I guess that's actually a good point. It's also like one of the things that the fear-based journalism always neglects to mention stuff like that, because it's kind of like a little bit it gives you hope in humanity. Just like, the well-known story of that Russian dude who worked in that missile silo or whatever, was supposed to push the button and destroy the planet because there was like a malfunction in the rocket detection system. And they were thinking they were under attack by the Americans, American ICBMs. And he, by the chain of command and everything, he was supposed to just launch the nukes, and he was like, this doesn't make any sense. This is just one rocket. Wouldn't they just launch all their rockets? This must be a mistake, and it was a mistake. And he got, I think he got severely punished for not pushing the button, which is, on one hand, really, really dumb. On the other hand, that's how the chain of command works. As Jane would say, do you know what the chain of command is? It's the chain I get and go beat you with. Joss Whedon. Excellent writing. Whatever else you want to think of the man. So from that point of view, it makes sense. But, that kind of gives you hope as well. Or as Sting sang a long time ago in a song called Russians, I hope the Russians love their children too, which I think is apt. We have to, again, I'm usually not this positive, but again, this boils down to mutual respect and just not demonizing the other side and seeing that they're humans everywhere, which is also my kind of thing. Like with the really interesting stories, see this, about World War II in Nazi Germany, and those stories. This is why I liked Sabaton, right? Just listen to the song "No Bullets Fly" by Sabaton. I probably should put that in the show notes. Which is a fascinating song about a German fighter pilot who was supposed to shoot down a British bomber who had just bombed German cities, and then he just looks over and sees like the planes completely shot up, and he can basically see the airmen in the bomber just being wounded and crying, and he escorts the bomber out of the out of the German airspace, and instead of shooting it down, gives him a final salute and turns around, and kind of risks his own life in a court-martial in doing so. And those are the stories that I really find interesting, right? That is the stuff that pulls at my heartstrings, because we're all humans, and we have wars, and because it's just that's how humans work. But the really important thing is when you pull ourselves out of that, right? And the stories that are really amazing are the stories where somebody doesn't pull the trigger, right, and doesn't shoot the other guy. That's when humanity really shines through. And the only way we can believe that we can ever get out of shit like this is if we believe that the other side has people like that too, right? And that we, as me living in Germany, I'm at this point, I don't demonize the Russian soldiers. I do not support what they're doing in their, in quotes, special military operation, which is very special at this point because, they're mobilizing people. So kind of hard to understand how to not call that a war. But on the other hand, I don't blame some 17, 18-year-old kid. And even older, I also don't blame people who fall into the paranoia and fall into the propaganda and get pulled, on wrong information and dumb shit like nationalism and patriotism, which is just dumb. It's dumb on every side. It's dumb if you're a US patriot. It's dumb if you're a Russian patriot. They're really not German patriots, which is good. But it's a dumb thing to do, but there's reasons why people do this, right? And when you're like me and you have to come to terms with that, your grandfather, who was a very loving man in the short time he spent with you on this earth, and who was also somebody who when he was 17, joined the Waffen-SS and then went to the front and probably shot a lot of people. It's like being human is very complicated. From your sexual organs to your political beliefs. It's just a very hard thing. And to get a segue here, working into the next topic here, which is the previous episode, so the last episode we're going to talk about, that is something very hard to come to terms with and even harder to communicate, which is why journalists mostly fail and base their reporting on fear. And that was episode 126, The Scourge of Fear-Based Journalism. So commenting on that, Necros again chimes in from Russia. Love the episode. However, the main example you used to illustrate your points from the start, the nuclear train, left me somewhat puzzled. Disclaimer, I'm not with the armed forces, and most of what I know about warfare is either from the open sources or from my military training back in the medical university. Of course, they trained me to act as a medical officer at the time of war, not as a proper officer. We were given some access to classified materials during that training, but understandably, not much of it is relevant. I can't say I read through the reports of the nuclear tank carefully. To be honest, I didn't care enough to investigate. Fair enough. Understandable. But my initial thoughts were certainly not total bullshit, dismiss it. My train of thoughts, I don't know if that was a deliberate pun there, but if it was, hats off. My train of thoughts was more along the lines of obviously not ICBM scale stuff, would make no sense. Should be some tactical stuff, something like those 2 kiloton shells, tulpans. Does that have? No, it has no IPA, so I don't really know how to pronounce that properly. Tulpan. It's kind of like a self-propelled mortar, I guess. Yeah, self-propelled mortar. Tulpans use at distances of up to 18 kilometers, or those 4+ kiloton nukes that pions throw 30+ kilometers away. So Peony is also like a self-propelled howitzer kind of thing. And those are tactical nukes, right? They're nukes as, nuclear weapons that are grenades that you can throw, which are not a very good idea because it'll probably kill you. But the more practical are mortars, where there's also one you can just fire from shoulder launched or just like a normal mortar, and it like flies like 10 kilometers, and then there is a nuclear explosion. It's not a very big nuclear explosion, but there is a nuclear explosion. Wouldn't really change the military situation if used, but would provoke massive hysteria because it's nuclear, escalating without really escalating fits Putin's MO perfectly. Yes, I think you are completely correct on that one. This one has a potential to backfire like hell. Not that it ever stopped those people, true. Man, do I live in interesting times. We all do. On a side note, I wonder how they found out that those were nukes and not conventional charges. Probably should read into it. Nah, screw it. I have more urgent stuff at hand, which is very sensible. Was there really something about the story that should have flagged it as total bullshit for me, or did you really simply not think about the technical stuff? Yeah, I did. Didn't even come up because I think I just read more into the story. And the thing on the trains were, you provided links. I really should have looked this up. But they were like kind of they're like kind of like Scud launchers. You know that the Iraqi had Scud launchers. These basically tubes on the back of a truck that you can launch rockets with. And these are like, I think they're ballistic, but so I think I've said this in the episode. So there are some rockets you can launch that have a nuclear warhead, and they're like proper nukes. They're like, I think we're talking megaton range here. But you can also just launch conventional warheads. You can launch explosives, and you probably launch chemical weapons, all kinds of shit. It was just ridiculous to say. It was just random military equipment that you can also maybe launch nuke with. And they just said basically, oh, it's nuclear weapons. And also the other thing, so the thing with the tactical nukes is they're so small that you can't tell them if they're on the train. Like, you don't even have to have like one of these howitzers. Well, even you have one of these howitzers, but they also launch like conventional weapons, right? It's kind of like how the Germans have the Panzerhaubitze 2000. And, if we had like a shell that was nuclear that you could put in there, like if you put those things on a train, it was like we would transport a ton of Panzerhaubitze 2000 on a train to Ukraine. And then Putin went, oh, look, they're going to launch nukes because the Germans also have nuclear munitions. We don't. But if we had, that would be a dumb argument because generally you just launch normal artillery shells with that. Right? Technically, you can launch nukes probably, but those would be small. Those would be shells. You couldn't tell. You couldn't tell there was anything with nukes on that train. That was the whole idea. It was just random military equipment. And then also they were also talking about nuclear tests. Now, firing a nuke wherever, that is not a nuclear test, right? And I think it would definitely escalate because I think NATO would see that as an MAD, mutually assured destruction kind of thing. I think even they're not attacking a member of NATO, it would be right at the NATO border. You're firing a nuke. I don't think under the much quoted international law, it matters if that's an ICBM or if it's a tactical nuke. I don't think that matters. What is different is a nuclear test, which is weird because they were talking about nuclear tests. A nuclear test is where you build a tower and you put a nuke on top, or you put it under the earth or in the ocean. And then you tell everybody, guys, we're going to test something tomorrow and we're going to blow a nuke up there. And that is specifically different because that's not, there can be an escalation, right? Somebody like Kim Jong-un does that. That is also an escalation, but it's not an act of war. It would be a big escalation if they did that on territory that the Ukrainians claim is their territory and the Russians claim is Russian territory, right? That could be seen as an act of war, but it would still be a nuclear test. We're just firing a nuke somewhere. It's not a nuclear test. You can say that's testing a nuclear weapon, but that's I don't know, like the Americans launching a bunker buster bomb from a stealth bomber into the Kremlin and saying we just wanted to see if that bunker buster would go through the Kremlin walls, right? That would be clearly an act of war. So I think this whole story was just incredibly bullshit. But I'm not blaming you for not looking into it deeper because, you probably get more important stuff to deal about right now. I agree. And it was just a waste of time. I just used it as an example. It was just an example that came along for basically journalism where, oh my God, we're all going to die is substituted for, hey, let's do some actual research in the thing we're talking about. Right, and then on the same topic, India Charlie added Great episode, Fab. I've come to a similar conclusion over the last few years that virtually all news is a combination of fear-based and or teasing clickbaity title, which is purely to generate clicks without there being any substance behind it. Virtually all. I hope not the stuff I'm writing, because I'm trying very hard not to. My question is, how can a person keep themselves informed in a world and current events, but without subscribing to the addiction of mainstream media? What sources do you regularly follow? And do you have a way of consuming news media that doesn't get you hooked on the continual breaking news stories? So a few years ago, I would have said Twitter, or maybe even a year ago, which is a great source, but it's also now so full of the same shit that it's not a viable way. What I would do is, it's kind of more a mental thing. So I read the same news sources as everybody else, but I just get angry when they try to clickbait me, right? So for me, it's more of a, like, first of all, I think the first thing you have to do if you really want to get yourself out of this, break that addiction. Delete all your, whatever you need to do. Don't go to news sites anymore. And just like, a very healthy thing to do is maybe also do this when you're on holiday or whatever. Just don't watch TV, don't listen to the radio, don't read any news, deinstall Twitter, whatever you have to do. Deinstall all the apps. Don't read any news for, like, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. And then you will realize you don't miss anything. And it's incredibly easier for you to do than for me, because this is actually my job. But I do that on holiday. So you'll realize you won't miss anything. And then the thing is, so what I do is, like, okay, I can't do this because I'm a journalist and I need to stay focused on, like, I need to know about all this stuff. But if I was to extrapolate, is that a word? God, it's getting late. Extrapolate what I would do if I wasn't a journalist, and I'm still interested in news, whatever. What I would do is I would not read any news, and whenever I'm prompted, like when I see a Twitter message or somebody talks to me, or, you know, somebody in real life talks to me and says, oh, you know, the thing with Nord Stream or whatever, and then I'm like, okay, don't know anything about Nord Stream, but I'm just not going to enter that conversation, and then I'll go home or whatever, and I go online and I check. Then I have some sources, you know, that I not necessarily trust, but maybe they're balanced sources, and I'll check what they say about Nord Stream. I'll just Google it or whatever, and then I read a little bit about this, and then I know, or at least I know what the current picture in media is, and if I'm really interested, I can dig deeper how much I think that corresponds with reality. But then I know, and then I go away, right? And I'm not like sitting there and have to read updates about it every like 5 minutes. Like, why? That's the thing. I know it's really hard to do because we've kind of been trained by society to behave like this. But like, just divorce yourself from this is really important. News is really important. I realize I'm a news journalist and I say this. I'm an online news journalist and I say this, but I think it is, it's the only way. It's really hard to do, but, you know, maybe on holiday, you can do this. Maybe we have some listeners to the show who have done this or have their own approaches and would like to share that with us. Please, privatecitizen.press. As with everything you've heard on this, you're free to give us feedback on the feedback. And if you have any practical solutions for this kind of problem, let us know. Maybe I can also learn something new. Anyway, India Charlie continues. And a point regarding the nuclear threats issue. I'm not an expert in this area, though I've heard talks from people who are supposedly well informed, mainly serving and retired high-ranking British military officers. Someone explained to me that for Putin to use a nuke, e.g. a small tactical one, would be more about signaling and posture. Quote, we're strong and are actually prepared to use them, end quote. Much like the USA did to Japan at the end of World War II, although that was not maybe it was about signaling and posture, but they killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. well, if you take in all the cancer cases, probably. Like that was a, that was a military war crime. That was a war crime, right? They basically killed civilians in a very horrible way. But this is just me interjecting on one of my pet peeves. Much like the USA did to Japan at the end of World War II, quote, "We can keep doing this to your cities if you don't back down." Which was kind of a thing to do in World War II because it was like the first time, right? And then we kind of decided that we wouldn't do that anymore. Obviously, this doesn't work against nuclear-armed states, MID, mutual assured destruction, but it might be possible for Putin to perform a test shot of a small nuke on a deserted RF territory to send a signal. So Russian Federation territory to send a signal would be huge escalation provocation, as nuclear tests haven't been done for years, but not one which would immediately provoke a retaliation from NATO. Personally, I think this is possible, but unlikely. Yeah, I think aside from the train, which was a completely bullshit story, I think I agree with your analysis. I do think for a test, they would have to announce it first, even if they nuke their own country. Right? I mean, even the fucking North Koreans generally do that. But even if they didn't do it, it would be an escalation, but it wouldn't lead to like more nukes, right? If they just like went to somewhere on Russian Federation territory near Ukraine, and we're not talking like any of the disputed territories, right? That Ukraine says are part of or just historic until 8-9 years ago had been part of Ukraine. Let's put it that way. We're not talking Crimea, right? But like somewhere, I don't know, on the Russian side of the border, then that would be an incredible escalation. But it probably, I agree with you, wouldn't trigger a NATO response, because what do you do? Launch the ICBMs? Like what? I think it would lead to NATO moving a hell of a lot of troops into the general region, right? And probably preparing some other stuff that they might have as part of nuclear deterrence. But And I also had an email, this is the last point and kind of our last feedback, from Daryl. And Daryl said on this episode, although this is more general, and I'll get into that as well here as a last part of the show. Daryl said, "I really enjoy the podcast and hope you can continue finding great sources of material." So far, that hasn't been the problem. The problem has been finding time to do the research and recording it. But yeah, it generally there are topics everywhere. In episode 126, which I'm currently in the middle of, you talk about how unscientific Christianity is because we accept beliefs that can't be proven. There are many things people accept that can't be proven. I love my wife, and I'm sure you love your wife. Well, I do very much. But how can you prove it? We can demonstrate what we call evidence of our love, but no scientific proof. The same goes for many laws of nature and mathematics. General relativity, which like much science is based on a theory. Even the Euclidean axiom of parallel lines can't be proven because we cannot draw infinitely long parallel lines to prove that they never intersect. TLDR, there are many things we accept as truth, even though they are just theories. We don't yet have the technology or knowledge to prove them absolutely. Let me respond to this, and please let me preface this that I don't mean this personally, right? This is just an opinion, but I don't know if you're actually serious with this, or if this is kind of like, I don't know, kind of meant to draw me out a little bit. But if this is meant as you wrote it, then I don't think you understand scientific thinking. And I did an episode. Oh, I didn't link this, so I'll have to. Well, by the time you listen to this, it'll be in the show notes. As we record this, I have to look up what episode that was. Oh God, no, wrong button. Wrong button. That is not what we want. Scientific The Scientific Method, episode 63, where I attempt to explain this. Okay, so let me try. Okay, I'm gonna take you at face value, and I'm gonna take the bait, and I'm gonna try to explain here, right? Let's take it from the top. You say that Christianity is unscientific. Well, the belief in God is inherently unscientific for a very simple reason, because religion and all major religions actually pretty much state this. Certainly the Bible does in many cases, that belief in God is belief. It's not about, it's specifically not about, it doesn't need to be proven, right? If you and personally, I think it's kind of like, my stance on transgender and whatever, what you do in your private life, I don't care. I'm just, talking to you about this because you brought this up in reference to the show. So religion is by definition about, you don't need to prove anything. Your belief in God is your belief in God, and that is all you need, right? There needs to be no proof. I personally, as a scientific thinking person, think that is stated because there is no proof and you can't find one. But, that's a different discussion for another day. Then you can say, I love my wife. That is true, but that is also, that doesn't have any bearing on the discussion, because I agree with you that you can't prove that, or I can't prove that. But I'm not hinging my worldview on that, right? That doesn't affect anything, right? I'm not making political discussions based on that, right? But so if I build the very first plane, right, and I say I built this machine, and it will go into the sky safely, and you will fly like a bird, and then it will land safely, and you will be okay. And I say, kind of like I love my wife, this is a fact, but I can't prove it. You have to trust me on this. Or I use the scientific approach and say, okay, here's my reasoning why this plane will fly, because this is how air works, and how, there's less, if I build the wings like this way, then there's less molecules under the wings, and there will be pressure that pushes the wings up, which will carry the plane if it goes fast enough, and you'll be okay, right? It's a much better argument than the first one. So this whole, I agree that I can prove that, but that doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect society in any way. I'm not asking you to put your life in my hands, or to vote for me on the unprovable assumption or assertion that I love my wife, right? So that's kind of like not part of. It's kind of doesn't really apply here. But then you just talk about like there's same goes for many laws of nature and mathematics, and there I would disagree. And I would like to leave mathematics out of this because mathematics is very complicated. And to me, I've always had a very difficult relationship with math. For me, mathematics is not so much of a science. Mathematics is more of a philosophy. It's kind of you're building a system that's in itself like that in itself what's the word I'm looking for? It's consistent, right? It's in itself consistent, and you can use it to explain the world, and you can use it to invent things and also to prove things, but it's all within this system, right? And that system in itself is very, like there are areas of science that are almost like philosophy. I mean, the other reason is the other thing you talk about is the general principle of relativity. And if you ever read Hawkins' great book, A Short History of Time, on this, he explains how this is basically philosophy because, I mean, there are things we have been able to observe, kind of like how he won that bet about black holes. But like when that was all like created, you know, when he came up with this, or Einstein came up with this, it's all like it's completely philosophy. So Einstein looked at like what kind of things we can observe about the universe, and then logically extrapolated them out into an area we cannot observe. Like he's talking about the speed of light, and like the speed of light itself makes it impossible to observe certain things, right? So like if you have an object that goes at nearly the speed of light, you can't see it, and stuff like that. So that is like almost philosophy, but it is philosophy kind of like math done in a scientific mindset. And the scientific mindset is not about science is not about proving something finally. Science is about always. Science is only approaches fact. Science, that's the other episode I did about oh god, now I have to look that up. Which episode was that? Was that 62, I think? I'm going to link both of those in the show notes. Private Citizen Not Press. 64, the next episode, the problem with facts. Science doesn't really deal with fact as much as people think. Science is almost always about building a model. And you build a model that is as close as you can get it to reality. So close to reality that you really, in your experiments, can't tell the difference. But science is never about, I have proven this and the discussion rests. A real scientist, and I'm going to do an episode about this, and mixing this up with journalism soon. A real scientist always doubts. You always have to doubt, right? Somebody says, hey, Watson and Crick come along, they say, this is what the DNA looks like. And then you have 50 years of making experiments and building things, building like drugs that work because of this model. But the scientists will never say, well, that's how DNA looks. We looked at it now through like a special electron magnet, that's how it looks like. No, it's like, that's what we think it looks like. That you can't be surprised when tomorrow somebody comes along and says, well, actually, it's different. It won't be, most of the time, won't be radically different, but it'll be like, it's a little bit different. It actually looks a little bit different like this, right? And the fact that when physicists go, this is how an atom is built and this is how electrons work, that's a model. It's a very good model because I think we can split the atom and it makes a huge boom and the whole city is gone. So, there must be a lot that's true about this model, but it doesn't mean this is, in the end, actually what an atom looks like. It might look different, but we are close enough that we can use it to manipulate reality. And that is always what science is about. Science is never about proving it and then saying, well, we've proven it, let's move on. Well, you move on, but like somebody else comes along and looks at the same thing and says, this is different. And that is, in a nutshell, the difference between science and religion. Because religion is not like that at all. Because religion starts, all of religion, doesn't matter what religion. I think even shit like Scientology, that's not God. Although, yeah, they have that weird guy that blew up those planes on the volcanoes, Zardos or whatever his fucking name is. But let's talk about, Christianity. Christianity presupposes that God exists. That is like on your outset. Whereas the scientist goes, okay, it looks like God exists. Well, if he was like of the same persuasion, scientists in, let's say, the 1800s or whatever. It looks like God exists, but, we have to do experiments. I have to do an experiment. And that's the thing. And then the scientist goes on a hill and says, God, if you're there, strike me down with lightning. And if you don't, I won't believe in you. And then nothing happens. Right? And then the scientist goes home and says, okay, this experiment kind of would point in the direction that God doesn't exist, because all I know about God, or some of it, the Old Testament, I should really be that now. But the scientist doesn't go, okay, this proves that God doesn't exist. He's just like, okay, this is an indicator that maybe God doesn't exist, but maybe he does. Who knows, right? But that's like very different to starting out with, hey, yeah, God exists. And I don't care what you think, like in your personal life, but, when you build my airplanes and when you run my country and when you want to start a war, then I object to this kind of shit, right? There's a reason the Wehrmacht's motto and the Swedish Army's motto, by the way, was Gott mit uns, God with us. We had the Crusades. We have people blowing up airplanes. We have all these crazy people who do this kind of stuff. And there are crazy people everywhere, but generally scientists don't blow up planes to prove that the black hole exists or whatever, right? Scientists generally don't do that, which is why I'm on the side of scientists. And I strongly support and will fight for your right to believe whatever you want at home, in your private life. But I strongly have the opinion that if we, in an age after the Renaissance, that we've as a society we've progressed out of the Middle Ages, and that we should now build our state based on the foundation that you can do at home whatever you want, but religion has, for me, absolutely no place in the state. And it hurts me to no end that in Germany we have political parties who are until very recently, were in the government who you have a Christian in the name. Like, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, it's kind of like putting pumpkin in the pumpkin party. That's harmless. But, Christianity is not harmless. Christianity has killed millions upon millions of people in the last 2,000 years. History is rife with history is drowning in the dead that have been killed in the name of one god or the other, which is why I kind of really don't like religion personally. But that is not. It really isn't an attack against you. What would be another example? I also don't like people like cilantro, right? But again, coming back to the point that should have been the title of the episode: respect, mutual respect. Let's respect our differences. We're all very different. We all believe different things. And we should be able to communicate and discuss these things openly, and we should not discriminate against other people because they have other beliefs. And that goes to, whatever they think their identity is, what clothes they like to wear, what they do on Sunday, or what they think about God or whatever. I think we should all just accept that we're all very different and that we can get along, even though we are largely very different. And with that, that concludes the feedback. If you have any feedback on this feedback or on other things that I've discussed during this episode or previous episodes, please go to privatecitizen.press. Details how to contact me are in the show notes. And that just leads me to say that, you can become a producer on the show by writing in, being on the forum, discussing, engaging with me or with other producers. And that is very much appreciated. But I also need someone to put food on the table. I kind of need to earn some money here because, let's face it, I'm alienating politicians. I'm alienating all the other journalists. At some point, nobody will pay me for anything anymore because I like to speak my mind. And religions, I'm alienating religions, and also all the people who think J.K. Rowling's a turf, alienating them as well. So until I have my novel done and it's a bestseller, I kind of need to make money where I can. And you can help me out by tossing a coin to your podcaster over here. You can become a patron on Patreon, or send me money directly via PayPal, via producers at Fab Industries. All the details are in the show notes, privatecitizen.press. But please don't feel pressured to do so, because the show is produced under the value for value model, which means, just if you derive value from it, consider to give value back, but you don't have to. That's why you get it for free. And I also don't want to, I really don't want to make you feel bad. Also, like in these times, all the prices have just increased massively for pretty much everyone. It's completely understandable if you don't have any money to spare. Anyway, there were some people who had some money to spare to help me produce this episode, which is why I would like to thank them. Galtaran, Rodane the Insane, Steve Hose, Butterbeans. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to Michael Small, I11G, Jonathan M. Hitai, Michael Mullen Jensen, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Dave, Jackie Plage, Sandman616, IKN, Bennett Piata, Rizal, Vlad, Avis, Joe Poser, Dick Didi, Fadi Mansour, Kai Sears, David Potter, Mika, Cam, Mr. Amish, Indie GameX, Robert Forster, Captain Eckhead, RJ Tracy, Crunkle, Rick Bragg, Ricky M, Barry Williams, Jonathan, Astro C, Superuser D, and Florian Pigosh. And Jonathan says I said his name right once again. I'm full of winning, full of tiger blood tonight. Right, let's get the fuck out of here because it's actually after 12. But you haven't heard that. I did this episode because I said that in the beginning. This episode's officially released on the 12th of October, and it's just the I don't know, the American. It's the American time zone. We're in America right now. This show has come to you live from Dusseldorf, Texas, where we like country music, we like big trucks, and we like to shoot in the air. Anyway, also thanks to my Twitch subscribers, Mike the Dane, Bacon the Pork, Redeemer F, Galtaran, Jonathan 4747, El Terrestrius Jim, MT Sauro, P. Keemer, Indigo Charlie, and Captain Egghead. Lots of these are supporting the show multiple ways, which is amazing. You can do so on Twitch. I'm stream these episodes when I can on Twitch, obviously. And you can also subscribe for free with your Amazon Prime, Twitch Prime, Gaming, Jeff Bezos bucks if you want to. It all helps. It's all appreciated. All of it is appreciated. I also appreciate Bytemark at bytemark.co.uk, British cloud hosting company, who give me the servers and the bandwidth to host these audio files for free. And without them, I couldn't do the show. So thanks to Bytemark. And that's it. And as I said, I have to get out of here. So the theme song for this show is called Acoustic Rules by Raul Cabezali. And I am going to play you out with the song Muy Loca by Beba, which reminds me of the weekend. And I had a very good time on the weekend. I was in Alicante, and I was very lucky because my chiringuito was still open. So I spent the weekend on the beach, which was amazing. And this song reminds me of my chiringuito. So we're gonna which is a beach bar in Spanish. I was there strictly on business, supporting science. So also just hang out at the beach at like 27 degrees in October. It's pretty amazing. And I flew back on the Borussia Dortmund Airbus, which was pretty cool. I like that. That was good. I don't know. There probably was some Bayern Munich fans who weren't happy about that, but I was ecstatic. That was pretty cool. Anyway, this is Muy Loca by Beba, and I'll be back next week unless I catch a bullet or something, which toy. I don't hope will happen. Until then, it is Joss Sweden. Just to rub the salt in the wound here, but still, aim to misbehave.
Corpo quieto. Muy calor. Que loco. Bueno.
Well, thanks for sticking with me this late. This was a lot of fun. So I'll run off now and fix this. The things in post, and I'm going to release this episode because it's, as I said, it's already late enough. In case you want to stick around on Twitch, I am going to rate you to Tiger Writer, which is an amazing streamer. He's very cool. He's very musically talented and a good gamer, unlike me. And I really like him. He's a good guy. He swears, but he's a very respectful guy, very human, and I really like him a lot. And thanks for being here. Also, Indie Gamer, sorry it scared you. I saw that you were in a camper van and a stupid user. Don't yeah, I mean, I can apologize, but thanks for subscribing. I don't have that many. I don't have many subscribers, so I appreciate this very much. And yeah, I hope you all have a good night. And yeah, I hope to see you soon on Twitch. I don't know I'm trying to be back next week. I got a busy weekend. Currently, it's just work all week, and then the weekend it's like fun. For the next few weekends. So I can't complain, but it also doesn't leave me with much time. I also hope you liked the lighting. I improved my lighting a little bit. I can now rig the control room for red, like in a proper submarine. I thought that was cool. And yeah, see you soon, everybody. Say hello to Tiger Writer from me. And hopefully see you next week. Certainly on Wednesday for another podcast recording. I should be able to get that done. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good night.